How great is God, exalted in power, majestic above all. The heavens tell of his greatness. The skies display his awesome craftsmanship. Day after day they continue to speak. Night after night they make him known.
Okay, you should have all gotten one of these cards, and we want you to take those home, because what it is a summary of the best scientific evidences for why Jesus Christ is Creator, Lord, and Savior. And it's been our experience at Reasons to Believe. Still can't hear? So, all right. It's been our experience that most people who've been attending church for years simply aren't aware of these evidences. So that's a quick summary there. And actually, there's a little thing you can fill out, and if you do that, we'll give you a free DVD. There's a bunch at the back, and that's a DVD that's actually a little bit about tonight's message. I was raised here in Canada, mainly in Vancouver, but I got my education here in Toronto. But I didn't meet Christians till I was 27 years of age, but began studying astronomy when I was 7 years of age. And it was astronomy that persuaded me there had to be a God to explain the existence of the universe. And starting at age 17, I began to go through the holy books of the different religions of the world and finally recognized that the Bible is the one that gives an accurate description of the universe in which we live. Moreover, what really impressed me as a young astronomer, it was the only holy book I picked up that said we live in an expanding universe. A universe is traceable back to a beginning of space and time where the laws of physics don't change, where one of those laws is a pervasive law of decay, and hence we live in a universe that gets colder and colder as it gets older and older. And I recognize as a young astronomy student, no book of science, no book of philosophy, no book of theology made those statements outside the Bible until the 20th century. So that's what motivated me to sign my name in the back of a Gideon Bible, giving my life to Christ at age 19. But the first Christian I ever met was 2 weeks before I left the University of Toronto to go to Caltech. And when I arrived at Caltech, they showed me how to find Christians. They're all over the place in the US, so it's hard to miss them. The first 2 pages of the Bible. Because what I've learned in my ministry around the world is that that is the biggest problem for people coming to faith in Christ. And if you can't get people past Genesis 1 and Genesis 2, you're going to have a hard time getting them into the New Testament. And so what I want to do this evening is show you how the latest scientific evidence has established that indeed the science there not only is accurate, it was thousands of years ahead of its time. For me personally, as a 17 and 18-year-old, it was those early chapters of Genesis that gave me the most powerful scientific case that the Bible is indeed the inspired, inerrant Word of God. But I've since discovered that many Christians, as well as non-Christians, look at these texts as being a scientific embarrassment. So Genesis and science, are they enemies or are they allies? Now, it wasn't until I began speaking on seminary campuses that I realized that there is this widespread perception that it's impossible to reconcile science with Genesis chapter 1. And it actually goes back to this famous statement by Friedrich Delitzsch, a German theologian and archaeologist who made this statement 100 years ago. All attempts to harmonize our biblical story of the creation of the world with the results of natural science have been useless and must always be so. So frequently when I speak in seminaries or in churches, I'm having to deal with a defeatist attitude that it's impossible to reconcile science with the opening chapters of the Bible. But it was those opening chapters of the Bible that persuaded me that the entire Bible is scientifically accurate and every bit of it is the inspired Word of God. I think the big difference was this. I came to the Bible in a very different perspective than, say, most pastors and theologians. Why? Because I've been a passionate in studying science since I was 7 years of age. My parents tell me I was born to be a scientist. I was doing experiments from the time I was 2 years of age. I wasn't talking, but I was doing experiments. But one thing that impressed me when I first picked up that Gideon Bible, it was the only holy book I picked up that commanded objective testing. Test everything, hold fast to that which is good. You know what I found in the other holy books was an appeal to subjective testing. I mean, what I saw, a classic case was in the Mormon text where they say, if you got a warm feeling in the bosom, that proves to you it's true. Well, maybe that's why they don't drink coffee. But what I found in the Bible was different, saying, don't believe until you first put it to the test. Everything must be tested, but hold fast to that which proves good. I say that because many of my colleagues who are scientists, they know there's a God, but they don't live their lives like there is a God. So they haven't taken hold of that second step. Hold fast to that which is good. But what really impressed me about the Bible, it not only commanded objective testing, it showed me step by step how to put everything to the test. Now, being educated here in Canada, I was taught the scientific method when I was in grade 1. I got it in grade 2, grade 3. We got it every single year. But not one of my public school teachers told me where the scientific method came from. When I picked up Genesis 1, the scientific method popped right off the page. And what I realized is every time the Bible deals with an account of creation, it follows what we call the scientific method. And it was at age 18 that I did some background reading in the history of the scientific method, and I discovered its origin. The origin of the scientific method is the Bible. The origin of the scientific method is people during the Reformation reading the Bible for themselves, many of them being science-oriented. They discovered this testing method, they applied it to their scientific studies, and that was the birth of the scientific method. So it's no accident that the scientific revolution exploded out of Reformation Europe. It was Bible studies that gave birth to that scientific method. And what is the heart of that scientific method? The heart of the scientific method is to stop people from making interpretations before they've done their homework. And I remember doing lab work where I would teach students how to apply the scientific method. And indeed, you really have to discipline the students not to form interpretations too quickly. And so the heart of this method is, don't interpret until you first establish the point of view. It was Galileo who said at his court trial, the biggest mistake you can make in Bible interpretation is to get the wrong point of view. Step 1, establish the point of view or the frame of reference. Step 2, determine the starting conditions. Step 3, note what happens when, where, and in what order. And those are the 6 days of creation. They tell you what happens, when, and in what order. And you want to note how the final conditions are different from the starting conditions. And then and only then are you free to form an interpretation. But in science, we call it an hypothesis. An hypothesis is a starting interpretation, a lightly held interpretation with no emotional investment. Then you want to test that interpretation with other experiments, observations, or in the case of the Bible, other texts of creation. And that's one thing that struck me the first time I picked up the Bible. If you look at the Quran, for example, there are only 3 texts on creation, and they contradict one another. What I found in the Bible were 27 chapter-length or longer texts on creation. And so there's multiple opportunities, for example, to test your interpretation of Genesis 1 against everything else that the Bible reveals about creation. Then you want to revise your interpretation accordingly. But you're not done yet. Having done these 7 steps, you go back to step 1 and say, in light of those 7 steps, how well did I do in establishing the frame of reference, the initial conditions? This is a method you repeat over and over again. Based on the biblical principle, only God knows everything. But God is giving us this biblical testing method whereby we can progressively get closer and closer to the truth he wants us to reveal. So this is a never-ending exercise. We keep practicing it. Scientists do that. I'm arguing that's also a good way to study our Bible. Follow the biblical testing method. Genesis 1 opens up with this statement. And I've found no matter where I travel in the world, everybody knows in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. Most places in the world, that's the only Bible verse they know. But when it says the heavens and the earth, I remember reading that saying, I wonder what the heavens and the earth are. I read through the entire Old Testament and discovered the word universe never shows up. There is no Hebrew word for universe. Instead, they have this phrase, Shamayan Ares, with a definite article. Wherever you see that, it means the totality of all physical reality, all matter, all energy, all space and time. That's the heavens and the earth. It's used only 9 times in the Old Testament. Then you got the word create. The Hebrew word there is bara, which means to bring into existence something brand new that never existed before. Now, there's a parallel phrase in the New Testament, Hebrews 11:3. The universe that we can detect did not come from that which we can detect. We can detect matter, energy, space, and time. Or you can go to 2 Timothy 1:9. The grace of God that we now experience was put into effect before the beginning of time. I'm encouraged by that because what it tells me is that before God created anything, he had redemption in mind. So his redemptive act was in place before he created anything. But notice that it's saying the beginning of the universe is the beginning of space and time itself. Now, I was reading the Bible for the first time at that same period in which physicists in Britain were developing the first of the space-time theorems. And I'm going to show you one of those theorems. Any universe that on average expands has a beginning in the finite past, including a beginning of space and time, and thus implies a transcendent causal agent. Now, these theorems are based on only 2 assumptions. Assumption 1 is that the universe contains mass. All of you here are living proof that the universe contains mass. The second assumption is that general relativity gives us a reliable description of movements of bodies in the universe. And general relativity today ranks as the most exhaustively tested and best proven principle in all of physics. It's now proven to 15 places of the decimal. If those 2 conditions are correct, then that means there's an agent beyond space and time that created the universe. So notice in the very first verse of the Bible, when we contrast that with the book of nature, we get incontrovertible evidence that God exists. I mean, what is the definition of the God of the Bible? A being beyond space and time that created everything. So if you're wanting to have rigorous proof that the God of the Bible created the universe, you have it just in these first few minutes. But here's where most people go wrong on Genesis 1. They fail to recognize that the frame of reference changes from 1:1 to 1:2. By the way, the physicists that came up with this theorem, they said all reasonable expanding universe models are subject to the relentless grip of the space-time theorems. So relentless is that grip today that no longer can scientists presume that all causes are natural. I mean, if you were to ask me as a scientist, what's the greatest miracle any scientist could possibly hope to uncover? How about the coming into existence of all physical reality? And here's the point. Given that we've got rigorous proof that the greatest possible scientific miracle has now been established, that opens up the possibility that that Creator may have intervened with other miracles. And that's what the 6 days are all about. It tells us about the subsequent miracles that Creator performed. Or to put it another way, some kind of God exists. Now, the power of these space-time theorems is the impact it's had on our educated atheistic community. I mean, the latest books being put out by physicists and astronomers are now conceding that some kind of God must exist. I would argue that North America's most famous atheist scientist is Lawrence Krauss. He just published a book called Universe from Nothing. But this is what he says on page 173 of his book. One cannot rule out such a deistic view of nature. And what I think a lot of people in churches don't realize, in terms of atheism, the battlefield has changed. It's no longer an argument against the existence of God. It's now an argument against that God being a personal being. Because of the force of the space-time theorems, they know there has to be some kind of deity to explain where the universe came from. But now these people who call themselves atheists are basically saying that God, whatever you think he is, has taken a very long nap. He's not doing anything since he created the universe. So don't worry about how he's evaluating your life. He stopped being interested in anything when he created the universe. But this is what the 6 days are all about. As I mentioned earlier, the reason why so many people think Genesis teaches scientific nonsense, they don't realize that the point of view changes from the universe as a whole to the surface of the earth in Genesis 1:2. God was hovering over the surface of the waters of planet Earth. There it's telling us that we're to understand the 6 days of creation from the point of view of an observer on the surface of the waters, below the cloud layer, not above the cloud layer. Now, if you leave the point of view up in the universe, where this observer is looking down on the earth, then I would agree the content of the 6 creation days is scientifically ludicrous. But if the point of view is the surface of the waters, everything is a perfect fit. And it transforms Genesis 1 from being the greatest scientific embarrassment for people in the church to being the most powerful evidence that indeed the Bible is scientifically accurate cover to cover. Now, that's the point of view. Genesis 1:2 also establishes the starting conditions. It tells us that before God performs any miracles on the earth, this is the condition of the earth. It's dark on the surface of the waters. So on the surface of the waters, it's dark everywhere over the whole earth. That the water covers the entire surface. There are no land masses, just water. And the earth is empty of life, and it's unfit for life. It is formless and void. So those are the initial conditions of planet Earth. Then the Spirit of God begins to work. But before I take you through the 6 days, need to deal with the elephant in the room. What do you do with the days of creation? And you may be aware that there's quite a debate within the church. Are these days 24-hour periods, or are they long periods of time? Now, the Hebrew word that's translated day is the word yom. And unlike our English language, and by the way, when Christians fight over Genesis, notice they all speak English. This is an English language controversy. And what's not being appreciated is the huge difference between biblical Hebrew and modern-day English. Modern-day English, the vocabulary size exceeds 4 million words. In fact, you can't even be fluent unless you know at least 50,000 words, even if you're not doing anything scientific. 4 million words plus. You know how many words there are in biblical Hebrew? If you don't count the names of people and cities, there's only 3,000 words. Now, how Hebrew handles this is that every Hebrew noun has multiple literal definitions. So when you see the word earth in Genesis 1, it's got 5 different literal definitions. The word heaven has 3 different definitions. It explains why Paul in Corinthians said, I was taken up to the 3rd heaven, because he knew the Hebrew word for heaven has 3 different definitions. The Hebrew word for day, yom, has 4 different literal definitions. It can mean part of the daylight hours, all of the daylight hours, a 24-hour period, or a long but finite period of time. And so if you believe that God created in 6 long periods of time, you are believing that God created in 6 literal days, because that's one of the literal definitions of the word yom. The other thing that's special about Hebrew, they don't have a word for an epoch of time. There is no word for era or eon or epoch. They only have the word yom. It's the only word that exists in biblical Hebrew to describe a long period of time. But let me give you a couple reasons why I think that it must be 6 consecutive long periods of time. When you look at the 7th day, and you won't find the 7th day until you get to the first few verses of Genesis 2. Frankly, I think they should have broken the chapter at Genesis 2:4. Then you would have had the whole 7 days. But you notice about the 6 days, each one has an evening and a morning. But for the 7th day, there is no evening and morning. And when I first read this at age 17, I didn't know what those words meant in Hebrew, but it said at the minimum, it means that each day has a start point and an end point. And the fact that we have no evening and morning for the 7th day means that it's not yet finished. And as I read on in the Bible, I found 3 texts, Psalm 95, John 5, and Hebrews 4, that tell us we're still in God's 7th day. In fact, what we see in the book of Romans, the 7th day will not end until the full number of human beings who will be redeemed has been reached. And we're not there yet. Or it's not going to happen until evil has been conquered and permanently removed. So as long as evil is here, we know we're still in the 7th day. And God will create again. Revelation 21, we have the 8th day when God creates again. But when I saw that as a 17-year-old, it also answered for me the fossil record enigma. You know, something that bothered me ever since I was 9 years of age. You say, why 9? That's when my parents bought me a bunch of books on evolutionary biology. I read those books and said the numbers don't add up. Because what I saw there at age 9, we have all this evidence for new species of life appearing before human beings show up. But once human beings are here, the speciation rate drops to a virtual 0. So we have an average of 1 new species appearing every year before human beings show up, and virtually none afterwards. When I read Genesis, I said, finally, an answer to the fossil record enigma. We see it before human beings, because those are the 6 days when God creates. We don't see it now, because God has stopped creating. This is the day of rest, when he stops creating. It also explains why most scientists say we see no evidence for the handiwork of God. Now, I'm an astronomer, but there's only 12,000 research astronomers in the whole world. There's over 3 million research biologists. Yeah, thank you. And the difference is this. In astronomy, we get all of our data from the past. In fact, I tell my wife that because I'm an astronomer, I cannot be held accountable for the present. It takes time for light to travel to my telescope. But almost everything we study comes from deep time. And because of that, we see the handiwork of God everywhere. But most research biologists, over 90%, do their research in the present era, when God's at rest. So that explains why they say we see no evidence for God. They're looking on the wrong day. God's at rest on the 7th day from his work of creation, but he's active in the 6 days. And I'll share this with you. The majority of physical scientists, mathematicians, astronomers, and physicists believe in God and an afterlife, predominantly because they're looking at the deep time, deep past, whereas the vast majority of those in the life sciences don't believe in God and an afterlife. It's simply a difference of the days. And the other thing I would add is this. Look at Genesis 2. we have God creating in Genesis 1 both the human male and the human female on the sixth day. But notice in Genesis 2, God creates Adam first and Eve later. And just list everything that happens between God creating Adam and God creating Eve. I won't take you through it. You can check it out for yourself. But clearly, it's at least a passage of 6 months between the creation of Adam and the creation of Eve. And that's the sixth day. So if the sixth day is a long period of time and the seventh day is a long period of time, then the grammatical structure would tell us all these days are long periods of time. So don't be disturbed when a geologist or an astronomer tells you the universe is 14 billion years old and the earth is 4.5 billion years old. That does not contradict what Genesis teaches. However, I will say this, that given what we see in the history of the Bible, it does tell us that we humans are recent. We've only been here for thousands of years, not millions of years. And I won't have time to go into this. We have a whole book on this called Who is Adam? The latest genetic evidence and the latest evidence from the cultural Big Bangs agrees with the biblical date for God creating Adam and Eve. It's also consistent. The genetic evidence is now consistent with all of humanity coming from one woman, one man, from one place. So compelling is his new scientific model, they call it the Garden of Eden hypothesis because of how closely it matches what the Bible has taught for thousands of years. Well, back to these initial conditions. Dark on the surface of the waters, water covers the whole surface, no life and unfit for life. And what do you see in creation day one? Let there be light. Notice the text does not say that God created the light. It doesn't say that God made the light. It says, let the light be. Light was already present when God created the universe. Matter, energy, space, and time. Light filled the heavens, but it was dark on the surface of the earth. What happens on creation day one, God transforms our atmosphere from opaque to translucent. Say, how do you know that? Go to Job 38. Job 37, 38, and 39 also take you through the content of the 6 days of creation, only with much more detail. The most detailed account of the 6 days of creation is actually in the book of Job. And I don't think that's an accident because we have good textual evidence that the content of the book of Job predates that of Genesis by many hundreds of years. And what you actually see when you integrate Genesis 1 with the Job creation text is that Moses doesn't repeat what's already said in the book of Job. Now, what does it tell us in Job in the context of creation day one? God speaks and he says, I made the clouds its garment and wrapped it in thick darkness. Here it's explicitly telling us that the primordial earth was dark because of the clouds would not let any light pass through. What happened on creation day one, God didn't create light. He allowed the light to now come through the clouds. And as a scientist, I can tell you that there were chemical transformations in the atmosphere that brought about that transformation. We went from an opaque atmosphere to a translucent atmosphere. In fact, I can tell you this. It was the moon forming event that changed our planet from having an atmosphere 300 times thicker than we have today to one that's thin enough where advanced life would be possible. So you look up at the moon. That moon is what allows you to breathe air. It's that moon which allows us to have continents. Because the primordial Earth had an ocean that was more than 1,000 kilometers deep. The moon forming event got rid of our water, got rid of our atmosphere. Something called the late veneer replaced that atmosphere, but with a much thinner atmosphere and a much thinner layer of water. Now, if you want to see that laid out, we have a DVD. This is a television documentary we produced several years ago where I take you on a journey from the surface of the earth to the edge of the universe. But part of that DVD, I actually show you how scientists have determined how the earth got its properties and how the moon formed, and how it is our atmosphere was transformed from being totally opaque, where no light could get through, to where it's now transparent. Now, it's that same set of the moon-forming event and the late veneer that also established an exquisitely fine-tuned water cycle. Now, what you see in Genesis 1 is that in creation day 2, let there be water above and let there be water below. Now, in terms of exactly what that means, you need to go to Job 37 and the first half of Job 38. You only got one sentence in Genesis 1, but in the book of Job, you got 1.5 full chapters. And what's basically telling us there is that the water above are the clouds, loaded with water vapor, and the water below are the oceans. And what you see in the book of Job, it actually describes how God set up this water cycle so we get 16 different kinds of precipitation. Now, it talks about the kinds of liquid precipitation, namely that there's rain and mist and dew. And there are places like deserts where it doesn't rain, but they get dew and they get mist. And then it talks about 3 kinds of frozen precipitation, how we get snow and we get hail and also frost. And the interesting thing about hail and frost, you can get hail and frost where the temperature is way above the freezing point of water. And this is the way we can get frozen precipitation over most of the earth. The value of frozen precipitation, it melts very slowly. We have permanently flowing rivers. I mean, Canada is a good example of that. What is it that feeds our rivers? It's the melting of glaciers in the Rockies and other mountainous regions in the north. If it wasn't for that snow and ice melt, these rivers would only flow intermittently. And so we have this water cycle. In fact, here's a fun exercise. Look at those chapters in Job. Make a list of all 16 different kinds of precipitation we get and determine how we need each one in order to have advanced civilization. And if you want a real fun exercise, we do this in the DVD. Calculate the probability that you could have a moon-forming event where you wind up with all these different forms of precipitation. I'll give you the answer. It's less than 1 chance in a quadrillion, 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 quadrillion. God set up the water cycle. And then in creation day 3, let there be land masses. Now, having a thin layer of water, and what has been brand new discovered, in fact, I'm writing about this in my next book, is that if you want stable plate tectonics, you have to have life. But if you want life, you have to have stable plate tectonics. So it's actually a synergy. Without plate tectonics, you can't have long-lasting life, but without long-lasting life, you can't have plate tectonics. The chemistry that life engenders actually stimulates the plate tectonics that allows continents to build up. And it's no accident that the first time we see stable land masses is when we have the origin of life. And so the two go together. Now, for the first time, geophysicists have actually calculated the history of the growth of the continental land masses. And this is what it looks like. Indeed, it verifies that Earth started off as a water world, where there was only water on the whole surface of the Earth. Then you get tiny volcanic islands, and then because of life, the plate tectonics kicks in. But what I want you to notice is when the Earth is about 2 billion years old, you get a very dramatic burst of the growth of continental land masses. Thereafter, it just slowly increases. Now, notice on this graph where you see the big burst of continental landmass growth. It's when the Earth is a little bit less than half of its current age. Where do we see it in Genesis 1? The beginning of creation day 3. A little bit less than halfway through the whole creation story. In other words, what we see here on this calculated the history of plate tectonics is the same as what we see described in the Bible. Then we move into the second half of creation day 3, and it says, let there be plants on the land masses. Now, in your English translation, it will say fruit and seeds and trees. But what you see in the original Hebrew, it uses this word dasheh, which means vegetation. And then it gives you 3 examples. And the 3 examples are the seeds, the fruit, and the trees. But if you actually look at them in the Hebrew, they're terms that are generic to all plant life. I say this because skeptics have looked at Genesis 1 and said there's no way apricots show up that early. But the text is not speaking about apricots. It's speaking about vegetation on the continental land masses. And I remember when I debated Michael Shermer, the executive director of the Skeptic Society, he says, the fossil record tells us that the animals in the oceans come before plants on the land. I said, that's the fossil record, but keep in mind, animals have shells and bones, plants don't. So the probability of long-lasting fossils is not going to be there for the plants as it is for the animals. But here's the good news. Just in the past few years, these articles got published in Nature, where they found not fossils, but the isotope signature that tells us that plants were just as abundant in the continental land masses for 200 million years before the appearance of animals in the ocean as the 200 million years thereafter. And then just 2 years ago, they've actually found fossils, not complete fossils, but fossil parts that show that plants have been just as abundant on the continental land masses for 600 million years before the appearance of animals in the ocean. And therefore, just in the past few years, we've seen the Bible vindicated on its order of events of the creation of plants and animals. Then we got day 4. And here again, it says, let there be. It doesn't say that God created the sun, moon, and stars or made them. It says, let there be the great lights. And this is when the atmosphere goes from translucent to transparent. Now, I grew up in British Columbia, on the coast. Our skies are translucent there almost all the time. Only occasionally do the clouds break and you can see what's beyond. But this is what happened on creation day 4. The earth transformed from an atmosphere where it was permanently overcast to one where the clouds would break. Now notice what you see immediately thereafter that statement. Let there be the great lights in the sky so that they may serve as signs to mark seasons, days, and years. Obvious question is, for whose benefit? Well, what I notice at age 17, all the life that's described after day 4 needs to know where the sun, moon, and stars are in the sky in order to regulate their complex biological clocks. But all the life mentioned before the 4th day doesn't need to know that. If you're a bacterium, it makes no difference. However, if you're a bird, or you're a mammal, or even if you're a clam or an oyster, it's crucial you know where the stars are in the sky and the sun and moon so that you can reproduce at the right time of the year and migrate at the right time of the year. We also know what was responsible for transforming the atmosphere from being completely cloudy all the time to where it would now be transparent. It's the great oxygenation events. And so 4 billion, when the Earth was 4 billion years old, the oxygen content jumped from 1% in the atmosphere to 10%. Now that's what cleared the atmosphere, but it also made possible the appearance of animals. Animals can't exist unless the oxygen content is at least that high. And we notice in the fossil record, the moment oxygen hits that level, immediately you got animals. There's no time delay. They happen right away. Now, from an evolutionary perspective, you'd expect a long time delay. But what we actually see is a 0 time delay. The oxygen jumps up very suddenly, and at that very moment, we have a proliferation of animals. So, the confusion, though, is where it says God made 2 great lights. That's verse 16. A lot of people look at that and said, doesn't that say that God made the sun, moon, and stars on the 4th day? Well, this is Hebrew. It's not English. This text is simply telling us they were made in the past. It's saying they were made before the 4th day, not on the 4th day. Why are they mentioned? It's the first time that anybody even be able to see the sun, moon, and stars. But then day 5, let the seas swarm with animals. And this is a reference to what we now know to be the Cambrian explosion. And here in Canada, we've got one of the best pieces of evidence of the Cambrian explosion, the Burgess Shale in Yoho National Park. And just 4 months ago, they discovered an equally productive exposure of the Cambrian explosion, this time in Kootenay National Park. And what we see with the Cambrian explosion, it's not an evolutionary tree. Rather, what we see is an evolutionary lawn, where all these different species of animals show up at the same time. Matter of fact, what we see is this sudden appearance of 60 different body plans of animal life. Today on planet Earth, there's only 30. There were way more at the time of the Cambrian explosion. and they all came at the same time. By the way, the phylum to which we belong, the chordate phylum, it was there at the base of the Cambrian explosion. There were even vertebrates at the base of the Cambrian explosion. Now, this has been recognized for over 30 years as one of the greatest challenges to a Darwinian evolutionary perspective. Kevin Peterson says this about the Cambrian explosion. Although the Cambrian explosion is of singular importance to understanding the history of life, it continues to defy explanation. What he meant by that was a naturalistic explanation. Or how about Richard Dawkins, probably the world's most famous atheist? This is what he wrote about the Cambrian explosion. The Cambrian strata of rocks, vintage about 600 million years, are the oldest ones in which we find most of the major invertebrate groups. And we find many of them already in an advanced state of evolution the very first time they appear. It is as though they were just planted there without any evolutionary history. They just suddenly come out of nowhere. Or Kevin Peterson, in the latest review, said elucidating the materialistic basis. By that he means a godless basis of the Cambrian explosion has become more elusive, not less, the more we know about the event itself. And frankly, I think that's how we should test creation-evolution models. What happens to the models as we learn more from the book of nature? If the case gets stronger, you're on the right path. But if the case gets weaker, you probably need to abandon your model. In the case of the materialistic explanation of the Cambrian explosion, it's gotten dramatically weaker as we learn more and more. But Creation Day 5 isn't done yet. It speaks about the creation of seabirds or sea animals and birds. And this is only the second time in the text that you see the word create. We see it for the universe. We see it here again in day 5. And it's a reference to the fact that these are animals that are not just physical, they're soulish. In fact, what we see in the text, it says God made these animals and he created them. It uses two verbs because he's making them from stuff that already existed. That refers to their bodies. But what's brand new is a soul that exists within these creatures. Now, it's not a soul like we human beings have. The Hebrew has this word nephesh, translated soulish animal, and it means animals with emotions, mind, and will, with a capacity to form relationships, a motivation to nurture their young, and a capacity and a motivation to serve and please human beings. So these are the animals that God created to serve us and to form relationships with us. So that includes all of our agricultural animals, but also all the animals we make pets out of. All birds and mammals are part of the nephesh. And then in day 6, it speaks about God creating 3 highly advanced kinds of land mammals to help launch human civilization. The first kind it mentions are the short-legged land mammals. These are the rodents. You say, what do we need rodents for? Well, we now know that it was human beings forming relationships with rodents that enabled us to move into cold climate zones. Why? Because these little tiny rodents, in order to keep their bodies warm, would have to grow thick, luxuriant fur. And early humans would, tame these animals, grow them in these huge pens, and basically they harvested their pelts for fur. And they make excellent material for clothing. And that's the reason why humans are able to move into all the places of the world. I mean, if you look at the human body, it's beautifully designed to live in a hot climate, but it's not well designed for a cold climate. I mean, we're much too skinny, we're bipedal, we don't have fur in our bodies, but we have this great perspiration system, so with the right kind of clothing, we can do fine. Thanks to the rodents, we have that. But in my book on Job, Hidden Treasures in the Book of Job, I describe how these rodents are actually assisting human beings today. The amazing thing is how our DNA is similar to rodent DNA in areas where it really counts for medical advance. So, for example, the DNA that governs memory pathways in humans It's identical to the pathways we see for mice and rats. So we're now able to use mice and rats in medical experiments to develop cures for dyslexia, Alzheimer's, dementia, and there's even black market drugs out that we call intellectual steroids. Thanks to these rodents, we have those. And then there's two different kinds of long-legged land mammals that God created, those that are easy to tame, contrasted with those that are difficult to tame. The easy-to-tame ones are the herbivores that God gave us in order that we could launch agriculture. And note this, those places in the world where they lacked these animals, they never got out of the Stone Age. Without cows, donkeys, and horses, they're all listed in the book of Job, you would never get out of the Stone Age. There's a reason why the Aborigines never got out of the Stone Age. They lacked these animals. But then the text also talks about the long-legged land animals that are difficult to tame, a reference to the carnivores. They do not make good agricultural animals, but they make excellent pets and companions. Or if you need somebody to defend you, what better thing can you have than a pet lion, right? So, but one of the things we've noticed about these carnivores, they're able to form very strong emotional bonds with human beings, and they'll literally do anything in order to please you, and will even be willing to sacrifice their lives to keep you safe. I write about this extensively in this book, Hidden Treasures in the Book of Job. I think we got some copies out at the back. And last of all, the text talks about God creating human beings. And interestingly, it says about us human beings that God made us and he created us. Why the two verbs? Our bodies aren't brand new. There are other animals that have bodies. Other creatures have mind, will, and emotions, but what they don't have is a spirit. And so God endowed us with a spirit. That also equips us to do mathematics and philosophy. But here's the principle. God endowed these birds and mammals with this soulishness. Why? So they could develop relationships with a higher species, namely as human beings. He endowed us human beings with a spirit so we could form a relationship with a higher being, namely God himself. We're the only species of life that God created that has the possibility of even exploring the issue, is there a God? And of being able to find that God and being able to develop a relationship with that God. Now, I spent about 2 nights, 4 hours each night when I was 17, going through Genesis chapter 1. And I was checking it against all the different textbooks I had on science. And when I came up with, at the end of that 8 hours of study, was that in Genesis 1, once we understand that this Hebrew word yom means a long period of time, and the frame of reference for the 6 days is the surface of the earth, then the text gets this score compared to the book of nature. 4 for 4 on the initial conditions, 10 for 10 on the events of creation, 10 for 10 on the order of the events, and 10 for 10 on the description of the events. Now, by this time, I had read about 150 different myths of creation in the different religions of the world and the different cultures of the world. The one that comes the closest to the Bible in terms of its scientific accuracy is the Enuma Elish of the Babylonians. It gets 2 out of 14 right. 2 right, 12 wrong. Say, what about the other creation stories? They all score 0. The Bible is the only one that got a perfect score, and gets a perfect score on material that Moses and Job would have no idea. A lot of this material has only been discovered in our lifetime, establishing that indeed everything we see here in Genesis 1 is indeed correctly stated. And this is one thing that brought me to faith in Christ, is realizing there's no other explanation for why this text is so accurate in the order of events, the initial conditions, the description of the events, other than the fact that it must be inspired by the one that actually created the universe, formed the earth, and put all of Earth's life on planet Earth. And that's what motivated me to sign my name in the back of a Gideon Bible, giving my life to Jesus Christ. But I'll tell you what was sad. After I signed my name in the Gideon Bible, thank you, must be some Gideons there at the back, I tried to find Christians. You know where I tried to find Christians? I tried to find them in churches. But I didn't know how to find a good church. And many of you know this. In most Canadian churches, the pastor and the people attending don't believe the Bible is the inspired, inerrant Word of God. When I discovered that, I said, well, I guess I'm not going to find Christians in churches. When I got here to the University of Toronto, I was so desperate to find Christians that I actually got the Toronto Star and went through those 3 pages of the religion section they have on the weekend issue. And I said, I got to find some churches where people are excited and passionate about the Bible. So I ticked off a bunch of them and went to those churches. Every one of them was a cult. However, 2 weeks before I left the University of Toronto to go to Caltech, I met a medical doctor who was attending Little Trinity in downtown Toronto. And he said, we believe the Bible is the inspired, inerrant Word of God. So I actually got to go there, meet some Christians. But hey, I was on my way to Caltech. And when I got to Caltech, I ran it. By the way, Caltech is the #1 institution in the world when it comes to astrophysics. And some of the most famous astrophysicists in the world, they would see me and they say, Hugh, come into my office. And they say, close the door. When I got inside their office, they said, I'm a Christian. I go to this church. I sing in the choir. I teach an adult, or I teach a Bible study for children. But they also would say this, don't tell anybody here at Caltech what I told you. I said, why? I said, because I can't defend my Christian faith from a scientific perspective. But I'll pray for you, Hugh. Now, the other thing I saw happen at Caltech, I had an office partner from Australia, a committed atheist. And every day he would come by my desk and ask me questions about the Christian faith and the Bible. But you know what he would do? He would take everything I said, go down to the coffee room, and ridicule everything I said to the atheist astronomers there. That went on for 1.5 years. Then there was a day when Ian Lockhart went down to that coffee room and said, I can't ridicule Christianity or Hugh Ross anymore because last night I gave my life to Jesus Christ. Now, 10 months later, Ian Lockhart, 32 years of age, died of a sudden heart attack. But he died a believer in Jesus Christ. And when he died like that, a lot of the other astronomers said, I wonder if his coming to Christ was just simply an accident. And that opened up all kinds of opportunities. I want to tell you, we've even seen a Nobel laureate come to faith in Christ as a result of looking at our books and talking to us. Don't write off the scientific community. They're ripe to come to faith in Christ, but you need to reach them in the right way. We're going to take whatever time remains for questions. I'll take whatever question you want to ask. It doesn't have to be in tonight's topic. But please, I got one request. One question per person per turn. If you got a 4-part question, I'm going to ask you to take 4 separate turns. And hey, if you haven't gotten enough of this, there's a book outside called Navigating Genesis. It's just been out. It's only been out for a couple of months, but it's already in a second printing. People are giving it away to their non-Christian friends. It tells a story of how we even got a stronger case that Genesis is the inspired, inerrant Word of God than the case I gave you tonight. We also have a few copies of this item. This is a debate I did at Caltech at the International Skeptic Society conference. It was me and 700 atheists from around the world. And we sell this DVD for $5. You can get it from the Skeptic Society for $30. But we want you to see how well the Christian faith stands up in an extremely hostile audience. With that, I'd like to take some time for questions. So who's got a question? We got a microphone here for you, too. Yeah, I'll repeat the question. Oh, I need the microphone back. All right. Yeah, we're going to have to just use one microphone here. The question was, how reliable is carbon-14 dating to date the age of the Earth? The answer is it's not reliable at all because it's got the wrong half-life. With any radiometric tool, it's only reliable 6 times more or 6 times less than the half-life. Say, what's the half-life? That's when half of the material decays away. Carbon-14 has a half-life of 5,715 years. So it's useless for dating something that's, say, 500 years old. That's too young. It's also useless to date anything that's more than 30,000 years old. It's great for dating something that's between those two dates. The other thing about carbon-14 is that it tells you how long something's been dead. So it's useless for dating a rock or dating the earth, because the earth was never alive. A rock was never alive. So it's great for giving you a date of a Bible manuscript that was written, say, 2,000 years ago. That's right around the half-life, and you'll get an accurate date. But dating the earth is not useful for dating the earth at all. Now, here's the reason why some people get deceived by it. It's because there's always a background signal. In the earth, there's uranium and thorium. In the earth, there's also nitrogen. And the decay of uranium and thorium acting on the nitrogen will make carbon-14. And so you get a date of any rock in the crust of the earth of about 58,000 years. That's the background signal. That's not the age of the earth. That's simply the background signal.
So, what are Hebrew scholars for religious interest were saying about that, specifically with regard to the word yom?
Yeah, I got the word yom part. What's the question?
What do Hebrew scholars say about the word yom?
Got it.
Okay, the question was, what do Hebrew scholars say about the definitions of the word yom? Well, in my talk, I was giving you verbatim what they say. What I was giving you were quotes from the lexicon, so you can pick up any lexicon on the Hebrew word yom, and you'll see that it has those 4 different definitions. For example, when I debate younger creationists, their Hebrew scholars do not dispute that it is 4 different literal definitions. Their dispute is they think the context requires them to be 24-hour days because the days are numbered and bracketed by evening and morning. And they'll make the argument that everywhere else in the Bible where the days are numbered, they're 24-hour days. Well, actually, that claim is not true. In Hosea 6:2, we have numbered days that are about 1,000 years apiece. And by the way, all those other examples are for human history. Genesis is the only place where we're using numbered days for natural history. Likewise, they'll say that the word evening and morning is attached to the word day. Elsewhere in the Bible, it's always a 24-hour day. Well, again, you need to check their examples. So what you discover is Genesis is the only place where you have the word evening and morning in the same sentence attached to the word day. You know, I checked the references. They're on the same page, but not in the same sentence. And once again, that's the only place where it would be used for natural history. If you're interested, I've written a book on this called The Matter of Days. We don't have it out there, but it is available.
Thank you for the informative talk. It's very intellectual. My question is, in the book of Genesis, it says something about whenever God created, for example, the earth and the skies and so on, he always said, and God saw that this was good.
Yes.
When he came to creating the water, he didn't say that.
Right.
So that's just half of my question. Okay? Yes. The other half. It's kind of related. You mentioned 3 types of precipitation: the mist, and the rain, and the dew. Did it rain before the flood? Did it rain or not?
Okay, did it rain before the flood? Well, if you look in Genesis 2, it contrasts 2 Hebrew words, mist and rain, and the words are ed and matar. And lexically, they mean drops of water falling from the sky, in one case of small size, another case of large size. Now, in both cases, it's precipitation from the sky. It's liquid. You're going to get a rainbow. So there were rainbows before Noah saw the rainbow. And that's clear because whenever God signs a covenant, he always uses something that from nature that people are familiar with. So the rainbow in Genesis 9 is not the first time rainbows happen. God is basically saying to Noah, know all those rainbows you've been seeing? From now on, that's going to be a sign of the covenant agreement I make with you, that I'm not going to destroy humanity with a flood ever again. And that's true of all the covenants that God signs with humanity. always uses something familiar and natural to sign the covenant. Now I'm trying to remember the first half of his question.
When he created everything,
Yeah, it was good.
except for the water.
Right. Yeah, the first part of his question was, you see in Genesis that 5 times we get the comment, it was good, it was good, it was good, but it's missing for when God sets up the water. So why is it missing there, and why is it there in the other places? Well, if you actually read on to the very end of the creation text, which takes you to Genesis 2:4, God looks at all the stuff that he's done in the 6 days and said, it is all very good. So in that sense, I think it's covered. It's all very good. It's all part of that good creation. Now, some people look at that very good statement and therefore conclude that this creation that God set up in Genesis 1 is the perfect creation, or the ultimate creation, and they get the idea that when God conquers evil once and for all, he's going to restore the earth like it was in the Garden of Eden. That's not what Revelation 21 says. Revelation 21 says it's a new creation. The old will pass away. It's going to be replaced by something completely different. And it actually tells you how different it will be. It'll be a place with no thermodynamics. And by the way, that's repeated in Romans 8:23, that the moment the full number of people have been redeemed, then thermodynamics goes away, the law of decay. It's a place where there's no gravity, there's no electromagnetism. Even our space-time dimensions will be changed. Why? All of that, the space-time dimensions, the gravity, the electromagnetism, the thermodynamic laws, the strong and weak nuclear force, all of those are crucial as tools in God's hands to quickly and efficiently eliminate evil once and for all. And once evil is gone, there's no need for gravity. There's no need for electromagnetism or thermodynamics. So when you get to the new creation, you will not have to worry about gravity pulling your chin down as you get older and older. There won't be any gravity there. You won't have to worry about electromagnetism wrinkling your skin. There won't be any electromagnetism. Huh?
And we won't get older.
You won't get older. There's no thermodynamics. Nothing decays. And so we see in Genesis 1 is the perfect creation to eliminate evil quickly and efficiently. But once that happens, God's going to replace his universe with a brand new realm, radically different, and it's going to be so good and so wonderful, as Paul says, no one can imagine how great and wonderful it will be. But it's the same Apostle Paul who exhorts us, every day do your best to imagine how good and wonderful it will be. So one of the books outside, Why the Universe is the Way It Is, challenges you to start imagining how great and wonderful it will be. We get you started. We want you to take it the rest of the way. But thank you for that question.
It's a boneless flood. I understand that your position would be that it was not worldwide and it's not responsible for the geologic record. If that's true, doesn't the kind of boneless flood sort of come silly? Like it's like a local flood, it just sort of vacate the area and come back afterwards. There's no need for the animals.
Okay, the question was Noah's flood. Is it global? Is it local? Worldwide? What's going on there? And if it's not global, then what's the purpose of the flood? Couldn't Noah just take his family and move away and come back? And why take all those animals? Well, what you notice in the flood accounts, and by the way, it's not just limited to Genesis. You'll find quite a bit in 2 Peter. You'll find a lot in the Psalms and in Proverbs and in Job, all dealing with the flood. And so our exhortation is you want to study all the flood texts before drawing any conclusions. Hopefully you got that tonight. I was trying to encourage you. You want to look at all the texts before drawing a conclusion. And the book out there, Navigating Genesis, 5 chapters are on the flood, because we realize this is a huge division amongst Christians, and it's also a huge point of ridicule for non-Christians. So we devote quite a bit of content to that. First thing we point out is that the text teaches a worldwide flood, but not a global flood. You say, what's the difference? Well, we're in the 20th, 21st century. Whenever we say worldwide, we mean global. But what you notice is before the 20th century, when people said worldwide, they meant the world of their community. And you see this throughout the Bible. So one of the things I do is actually take you through every text in the Bible that talks about a worldwide event. And it's always the world of humanity, not the entire globe. I mean, a couple of examples. We have all the kings and queens of the entire world coming to Solomon to hear of his great wisdom. If you read the full text, it says these kings and queens came from as far away as Ethiopia and southern Arabia. So evidently the Incan kings did not come from Peru to hear the wisdom of Solomon. Or what Paul says of the Romans, your faith has been heard throughout the whole world. And he meant the Roman world, not necessarily the Aborigines in Australia. And what you see in 2 Peter, the world of the ungodly was destroyed. Or he says cosmos tote in 2 Peter 3, the world at the time the event took place. And that's what's interesting whenever the text talks about the flood, where it uses the word cosmos, the Greek word that can mean the whole world, it's always qualified by an adjective. Now, if he meant the entire planet, there would be no adjective. But every time the adjective is there, the world of the ungodly. Now, the principle here is that God's judgment wrath never extends beyond the geography of reprobation. So we see that, for example, with Sodom and Gomorrah, because God actually has a conversation with Abraham. And Abraham says, yes, I understand you're going to destroy Sodom, but what about these wicked Amorites up in the hills with me? What does God say? Their wickedness has not yet reached its fullness. I will not touch them. Your descendants 400 years from now, they will deal with them. But right now, their wickedness has not yet reached its fullness. But I am going to take care of Sodom and the 5 cities of the plain because of the depth of their wickedness. Now, given that God is only going to destroy the world of humanity, why does he have Noah build an ark? He could have said to Noah, look, just walk 3,000 miles away and you'll be fine, then walk 3,000 miles back. Well, that's 6,000 miles. It's not an easy thing to do with technology that existed at that time, but it's missing the principle that you see explained in the book of Hebrews. There it talks about Lot and Noah, and it lays out this principle. God never sends his judgment wrath upon reprobate populations without first sending him a prophet. So you notice with Lot, he had him be a judge in the city gate, probably for decades before he destroyed the city. And what does he say to Noah? Build an ark in a place where it never rains, and take 100 years to build the ark. That gave him 100 years to preach to that wicked generation. So they had no excuse. Noah was preaching them for that 100-year period. And now, why take these animals on board the ark? Well, what's interesting is if you read carefully the Hebrew words used for the animals, it's the word basar, which means soulish animal that is associated with human beings, which would be these birds and mammals. And so Noah took them on board the ark. Why didn't he have them just walk away? Well, those are animals that are very slow migrators. If we're talking mosquitoes, they would have gotten back there in quite a hurry. But if you're talking cows and horses, it would have literally taken centuries for them to come back. So yes, there were horses in Europe, but for Noah to wait for those horses to come back into the land where the ark landed, he wouldn't be able to launch civilization. Notice what the text says. Take a pair of each of these creatures that are soulish, but there's some of them I want you to take 7 pairs. The ones where he said 7 pairs, these are the animals that are most crucial for launching civilization. Because God's goal is that Noah and his sons would rapidly develop civilization and rapidly repopulate the planet, which meant they had to have those animals and they had to have them right away. Now, many more of your questions are answered in the book, so I'll just stop there and you can read the rest.
How can astrophysics and the study of space-time matter comment on that the transcendent cause of the universe being personal or conscious?
Okay, that was an excellent question that Okay, I talked about the evidence.
The question first, 'cause I don't think anybody
Okay. Well, his question was he could understand how the space-time theorems established there's a God beyond space and time, but I made the point that the real battle now is this God a personal being? And I never dealt with the evidence that he's a personal being. That's another 40-minute talk. So, but I'll try to be extremely brief. I would argue that the strongest evidence that God not only transcends space and time, but must be a personal being, would be dark energy. If you'd ask me as a scientist, where do we find the most spectacular evidence for supernatural, super intelligent design? I'd say dark energy. I'd say, great, what's dark energy? Well, dark energy makes up 3/4 of all the stuff of the universe. It's the energy that's embedded in the space surface of the universe. And the space surface is where all the stars and galaxies exist. We all exist on that space surface. But this dark energy works in such a way that as that space surface gets larger, it accelerates the expansion of the universe. And so we now know through detailed measurements that dark energy actually transitioned the universe from slowing down in expansion to speeding up. But here's where the design comes in. If dark energy were a little bit weaker than what we measure, then the universe would be expanding so slowly that gravity would collect all the matter in the universe and relatively quickly collapse it into black holes and neutron stars. Now, if all the mass of the universe is inside black holes and neutron stars, molecules are impossible, atoms are impossible, and life is impossible. However, if we were to make dark energy a little more powerful than it is, that would cause the universe to expand so quickly that gravity wouldn't be able to collect any matter to make galaxies, stars, or planets. And if the universe is nothing but dispersed gas, then clearly life is impossible. Now, how much do we have to fine-tune dark energy to get galaxies, stars, and planets? You have to fine-tune it to within 1 part in 10 to the 122nd in the index. So that's 122 zeros after the 1. To put that in context, we can compare the level of fine-tuning design in dark energy to the best example we have of human inventiveness, creativity, and engineering design. And I would argue today that would be the LIGO instrument, a very sophisticated gravity wave telescope. If we compare the finest human creativity and inventiveness to dark energy, it ranks inferior by 10 trillion times. What does that tell us? That the one that created matter, energy, space, and time, at a minimum, must be 10 to the 99 times more intelligent and more knowledgeable than the Caltech and MIT physicists that invented this amazing machine and designed it, and at least that many times better funded than the US government that made it all possible. Now, there's your proof that God must be a personal being, because only a personal being can manifest the attributes of intellect, knowledge, creativity, and power, but manifests it so many times greater than what we human beings are capable of. We know this isn't simply the God of Hinduism, Buddhism, or Islam. This has to be the intimate, powerful God we see recorded in the pages of Scripture. So that's the debate we're now having with these atheists. We got them to recognize that there must be a God. We're now trying to take them to the next level.
I'm fascinated with the space-time theorem and your conclusion that seems to be a consensus amongst your colleagues that there must be a transcendent source for creation. But I wonder, now that you say that, if all of your colleagues are generally in agreement. I'm reminded of a statement that came out in the news. Stephen Hawking, who I think is in the same field as you, and he was noted to have said, now we know there need not be a God. And I think he may have been making the same sort of arguments as you pointed out. So if there is a dissenting point of view, and if Dr. Hawking would be one who would express it, can you explain that a little bit to us? Thanks.
Okay, his question was Stephen Hawking's on record as saying that he doesn't think we need a God beyond space and time to explain where the universe came from. And well, I happen to have a relationship with a physicist. In fact, he's going to be speaking in Hamilton, I think, tomorrow at the American Scientific Affiliation. He lived with Stephen Hawking in his home for 4 years. And he's an evangelical Christian. And he said every morning, Jane Hawking, Stephen Hawking, and Don would have Bible study and prayer. And he said Stephen was fine as long as the conversation never got beyond God as simply the master of space and time. He says once we started talking about a personal God, all we got was the famous Stephen Hawking smirk, which means end of conversation. I don't want to hear anymore. And that's kind of where Stephen Hawking is today. Now, he has written books and research papers where he says we don't need this entity beyond space and time to explain where the universe came from. He does concede we need him to explain where math comes from and where the laws of physics come from. But he says we don't need him for the universe. On the other hand, in order to make that work, he has to deify the universe. So in his research papers, he says, let's just assume that the universe has 2 dimensions of time instead of 1 dimension of time. If it has these 2 dimensions of time, by the way, he's pretty clever. He says, let's just assume it has real time and imaginary time. But that's the equivalent to saying it's got 2 dimensions of time. He says if we do that, then we don't need a beginning to explain where the universe came from. But here's the problem, and he actually mentions this in his first popular book, A Brief History of Time. He says, of course we all realize that the real universe is confined to just real time. So he makes it clear that what he came up with was a what if. What if the universe had 2 dimensions of time instead of 1? But we have 8 separate proofs in physics that the universe indeed is constrained to a single dimension of time that can't be stopped and can't be reversed, in which case the conclusion of the space-time theorem stands. There must be an agent beyond space and time that's responsible for creating our universe of matter, energy, space, and time. And by the way, there are other atheist physicists making the same point, but each one is forced to redefine time and make time bigger and more expansive in its dimensionality than what physics proves it really is. In fact, I got to see that when I debated Victor Stenger at Caltech at the International Skeptic Society conference. Our debate was prefaced by 5 talks by atheist physicists and astronomers. Every one of them redefined time. And what's interesting is, evidently these atheists realize that's the only way they can escape the God of the Bible is to redefine time. Now, this is not unexpected in terms of what we see in Romans 1. What does Romans 1 say? That when people resist the authority of God over their lives, they worship the creation rather than the Creator, which means they're going to attribute properties to the creation that only belong to the Creator. And we're seeing with certain theoretical physicists is just a very sophisticated form of what we see described 2,000 years ago in the first chapter of Romans. And by the way, I wouldn't point a finger at them. I think we all have that tendency to look at nature and give it more properties than it really has. We do that with ourselves. We give ourselves more credit than we really deserve. And I think that Romans 1 is not just for the unbeliever, it's for the believer as well.
You said in your talk that the book of Job is essentially one of the oldest books of the Old Testament. Maybe one of your books, I just wanted to, I guess, maybe speak more on that. They didn't really say a lot because, I mean, as far as the goes, it's scholars tend to date the book of Job in the 6th century during the exile period, which would have made one of the oldest books. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on that. Why you think that is.
Okay, why do I think that Job is the oldest book of the Bible? Well, if you're listening carefully, I was making the point that the content in the book of the Job is the oldest of the Bible. Because Hebrew did not become a written language until 15th century BC. So I think Genesis, Exodus, Numbers, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy were all written in the 15th century BC, the very moment that Hebrew became a written language that was laid down. But what you'll see in my book up there, Hidden Treasures in the Book of Job, there's plenty of textual clues in the book of Job that its content must predate that of the Mosaic books. Because it's not speaking about nations, it's speaking about city-states. There is no priestly worship system in place. Notice the patriarchs are doing all the sacrifices. And also we look at the geographical place names. They're all located around the Persian Gulf. So there are other clues as well. But also what you notice is almost the entirety of the book of Job is poetry. And if you look at it in the original language, it's poetry that's designed to be easily memorized. So I believe what was going on was that people, before Hebrew became a written language, literally memorized the entire book of Job word for word and passed it on to the next generations. Now, what do Hebrew scholars say about this? They said, notice that there's a couple of paragraphs at the beginning of Job that's prose, and you also got a paragraph at the end of the book of Job. They said it's possible that that was written a little bit later, but they said the rest of the content probably was laid down by one of the participants in the debate. And frankly, I think the one who deserves the credit for recording all that, oh, sorry, I need to put that one up too, sorry. Personally, I think the one who deserves credit for making sure we had all the content of Job word for word was Elihu. Notice Elihu is silent for the first 32 chapters. He was a young man. He was sitting at the feet of four, probably the world's greatest scholars at the time, and I think he wanted to go just to hear what was happening. And by the way, people who don't have a written language actually have that capability of sitting down and actually memorizing everything that's being said in order to pass it on to somebody else. We don't do that because we can actually record it with technology. So who's going to bother memorizing something word for word as is being spoken? But the very fact that the poetry is set up the way it is tells me that probably for 500 or 600 years, people had the content of the book of Job as a memorized poem. And by the way, if you think that that's outrageous or beyond our capability, look at how many Muslims memorize the entire Quran word for word. And that's much more difficult to memorize than the poetry in Job, and it's much longer than the book of Job. So I don't think it's at all unrealistic that God preserved the content of the book of Job that long. And to me, it explains why Moses left out the most important creation content. For example, he says nothing about the expansion of the universe. Job had already covered that. And so when you actually put Job together with the writings of Moses, what you see is Moses adding to what the people already had. He doesn't repeat, he adds to what they already had. And that also answers the big charge, because I run into a lot of skeptics who say, why did Moses leave out the most important material? Well, it's because he was predated by Job.
Hi, Dr. Voss. Love the talk. I think you're doing a great service for Christ, and so I personally, I'd like to commend you for that. I really appreciate the talk. I did have a question about the literalism that seems to be inherent in the talk, or in some of your arguments. I, like you, kind of struggled with the whole idea of how do I reconcile science and the Bible, and for many years I struggled with it until I started reading some of the early church fathers commenting on the book of Genesis. And although some read it literally, many others, heralded from the School of Alexandria, from where our Orthodox faith really stems from, Clement of Alexandria, Origen, they read it allegorically, metaphorically, and they saw it as they drew out existential and philosophical implications from what was said, specifically regarding the fall. And my question is, given this different perspective on reading the book of Genesis, that it's not really literal by the word historical, it's reading it for its greater meaning and ramifications on everyday life. How do you, and some even current Orthodox people would argue that that reading doesn't conflict with science. It's on a different sphere of human, thinking. That there's no contradiction between science and the Bible. What do you think of that reasoning of Genesis 1 and 2?
Sure. Well, I have read all the works of the early church fathers. That's the question. what do you think about the early church fathers? Because when they wrote on Genesis, they took a lot more of the text as allegorical than the literal approach that I use tonight. Well, I have read all the works of the early church fathers on Genesis. What I find interesting is they wrote more on Genesis 1 than they wrote on any other text in Scripture. There's more in Genesis 1 than what they've commented on in the entire book of Romans. There's a lot on Romans, but they seem fixated, particularly in Genesis 1. But as you read the early church fathers, they were very literal and specific about Genesis teaching who is the creator and by what means does he create. Now, where they were very hesitant and often punting to allegory was on the sequence of events and the details of the events. But I think they were wise. They realized they were living in a day and an age when that simply couldn't be pushed very far. I mean, here we are in the 20th and 21st century. I mean, a lot has happened in terms of our understanding of those texts and also understanding the book of nature. What I appreciated about the early church fathers, and you particularly see this in the writings of Augustine, is when it came to the scientific matters, he made a specific statement: we would be wise not to overinterpret the text until we actually understand more from the book of nature. So as one of the last of the early church fathers, he encouraged a more conservative approach as what we try to draw from the text. But for example, he held the position that these days were not 24 hours, and he agreed with the rest of the early church fathers. The main point of Genesis is who is the one that creates, and does he really create everything? So they had disputes, for example, on when the sun shows up, but they all agreed that God is the author of everything, including all life. What I appreciate about those early church fathers, they frequently quoted from Isaiah 45, 48, and Psalm 104, making the point, all the life we see here on planet Earth, God is responsible for all of it. So it was really clear that they were not taking an evolutionary position on the history of life. And also what I appreciate is when it came to how long creation took, here they wrote 2,000 pages on Genesis 1. There may have been more, but that's how many pages we have today. But of those 2,000 pages, only 2 pages address the time scale issue. And none of the early church fathers took a dogmatic stand. They were very hesitant on that issue. I think we'd be wise to learn from them. When we have our creation debates within the church, we tend to get all upset about the timing. But the early church fathers had it right. The most important point is who creates. Secondarily, how he creates. When he creates is immaterial when it comes to the doctrine of salvation. And if we simply listen to that, then I think we could all get along with one another.
I am impressed with all the analysis that you did about the relationship of science and faith. But it's very interesting to know if there are any studies currently done to do more accurate relationship between the history that we know and the events of the Bible to demystify many things and many stories for people to understand and have a better connection.
Okay, his question was, thank you for showing a detailed integration of the content of Genesis 1 with God's second book, the Book of Nature. I mean, I love the Belgic Confession. God gave us 2 books, the Book of Scripture and the Book of Nature, and will both declare the righteousness and glory of the Creator. But his question was, do you know of anybody doing research that would do that with other texts of the Bible on other subjects besides what's addressed in Genesis 1? Well, we see that as our mission at Reasons to Believe. I mean, we've now published, I think, 22 books. I'm responsible for 14 of them myself, and we got a whole bunch more we're planning. I mean, I'm writing one right now on the history of life, and our goal is to show an even more detailed consistency between what we see declared in the Book of Nature and the Book of Scripture. Now, I would argue you've got to be careful with that. It's easy to read more into the biblical text than is there. So, for example, one of our volunteer scientists sent me a manuscript where he thought he could get particle physics out of these creation texts. Well, from my perspective, the Bible is silent on particle physics. I don't think we can pull pi mesons out of any text in the Bible. So you can definitely take it too far. And the same thing can happen on the book of nature. You can read more into it than what is theologically implied. On the other hand, there's a lot of work that's yet to be done. An exhortation we see both in Job and Psalms. The more we study the book of nature, the more we'll see the handiwork of God. And if I could leave you one encouragement. Every day our scientific team runs across a minimum of 10 research papers that make a stronger case for the Christian faith. And I encourage you to go on our website. All of our scientists are tweeting every day about these new discoveries, Facebook pages. We're doing our best to keep you up to date on those discoveries. Matter of fact, I think we... There you go. Whoops, pull it back. Okay, the question is, what's going on about Homo sapiens? And we don't have the book here, but you can get it from us. It's called Who is Adam? Where we talk about human origins in detail, what the Bible says, what the science says. Watch out for the term Homo sapiens. It doesn't mean human beings anymore. Human beings now is described as being Homo sapiens sapiens. We think twice. The rest of the bipedal primates only think once. So Homo sapiens is now a generic term that includes Homo sapiens ideltu, the Neanderthals, human beings, and conceivably other bipedal primates might join the family of Homo sapiens. But we human beings are distinct from all the other Homo sapiens species that are out there. In our book, Who is Adam, we make the point that we now have enough evidence to document that there is at least 10 separate species of bipedal primates that predated Adam and Eve. But with each one, we see that they exist for a period of time without measurable change. And when it comes to Neanderthal, we not only have the bones, we got the DNA. The DNA does not evolve. The bones don't evolve. With Homo erectus, we have a 1.8 million year period where we have Homo erecti fossils. We don't see any change in the bone structure. Now, if they're not changing morphologically and they're not changing in terms of their genetics, then that collapses the model that all bipedal primates are naturally descended from a common ancestor. In fact, what we see in the literature is that people from an evolutionary perspective are unsuccessful at trying to build any kind of phylogenetic tree for the bipedal primates. They're all separate, unconnected species that exist for a period of time without any possible connection with a previous species. They exist for a while and they go extinct. Now this raises a question. Why would God bother to create so many species of bipedal primates before human beings? Well, my colleague Fuz Rana, who is our genetics expert, he actually attended a conference in human origins, which included some of the leading atheist human origin specialists. And was one of them, Ian Tattersall, and a couple of others that made the point. Isn't it interesting that when we have lots of bipedal primate species that predated human beings, we have an extremely low extinction rate of large-bodied bird and mammals when humans enter that territory, and when we don't have any, the extinction is almost total. Let me give an example. When human beings entered Australia, they very quickly drove to extinction 94% of all the large-bodied bird and mammal species, and hence they lacked the animals to launch them out of the Stone Age. Notice the Aborigines were stuck in the Stone Age until Europeans came with the animals that they needed. Now, contrast that with sub-Saharan Africa, which had all of the bipedal primates I'm speaking of. When humans entered sub-Saharan Africa, the extinction rate was 4.5%. So almost all the large-bodied bird and mammal species survived. Likewise in Asia, the extinction rate was only 30%, and likewise in Europe, the extinction rate was a little higher than that, but in both cases, they had cows, they had horses, they had camels, and they were able to launch themselves out of the Stone Age. And what's interesting is you look at these 10 different species of bipedal primates, each successive one was better able to hunt large-bodied bird and mammal species. So our interpretation of Ian Tattersall's work is this, that God separately created, specially created these different species of bipedal primates, endowing them with the capacity to hunt bird and mammal species a little bit better than the previous one, in order to get these species of birds and mammals adapted to the coming future shock of human beings. Basically, God was training those animals. If you see tall creatures walking on two legs with sticks in their hands, run away. And therefore, in Africa, the extinction rate was really low, whereas in North and South America and Australia, where we have no bipedal primate finds, the extinction rate was extremely high. Likewise, North and South America, the inhabitants there never got out of the Stone Age until Europeans brought the animals that they needed.
How do you explain the discovery of life on other planets other than Earth in terms of faith?
Okay, how will I explain the discovery of life on other planets if that comes to be? Well, I've been on record in print since 1988. We will find the remains of life on every solar system body. It's guaranteed we'll find it. Why? Because every time a big meteor smacks into the Earth, it causes Earth's soil to be exported into interplanetary space. And every ton of Earth's soil has got 10 to the 17 bacteria in it, 100 quadrillion bacteria. Now, we would argue the best place to look for that Earth-transported remains of life would be the surface of the moon. On the surface of the moon, colleagues of mine have calculated that there's 20,000 kilograms of Earth soil on every 100 square kilometers. Now, we can go to Mars, but the figure on Mars is only 200 kilograms. So the layer on Mars is much thinner than it is on the moon. And what excites me about going to the moon, we know that almost all that material that got transported from the Earth occurred close to the origin of life on planet Earth. Now, because of Earth's geology, the fossils of Earth's first life have been destroyed. But we can go to the moon and we will find the pristine fossils of Earth's first life, and we'll be able to determine who got it right and what those fossils look like. Did the atheists get it right, or did the Christians get it right? So I've been telling NASA we need to go back to the moon with the objective not of finding pristine lunar rocks, but of finding Earth's soil with the pristine fossils of Earth's first life and see who got it right. And I said, everybody in America has got a vested interest in this. Everybody's going to want their tax dollars spent for that purpose. It's a great way to fund NASA. Now, in terms of your larger question, what if we find indigenous life on another planet? Well, 25 years ago, I wrote an article with two other astronomers that were also part of our Reasons to Believe team. And we wrote this article on purpose, talking about what if. And one of us defended the view that life will only exist on planet Earth, except for Earth-transported life, or the remains of Earth-transported life. Sam Connor chose to defend the position that there's going to be life on many, many planets. And then Guillermo Gonzalez defended the position, maybe primitive life on a few planets, like bacteria and nothing else. Now, our rationale was as follows. Sam Connor took the position, and all of us agreed, there's nothing in the Bible that would prevent God from creating life on another planet. The Bible is silent on that issue. But Sam Connor used this analogy. He says, when we look at the Earth, it seems like God really enjoys creating, so much so that we can label him a compulsive creator. Now, I think that's an overstatement, because I think that God was quite content before he created anything. But he says, it seems like God enjoys creating so much, why would he limit himself to one planet? Whereas I defended the position, as I read the Bible, it's a God that doesn't waste miracles. And how many creation miracles does he need to get us ready for the new creation? So I defended the position that I think Earth is probably the only place that God has created life, and yeah, maybe the remains are in a few other places. But I'll tell you, all three of us said, if we're wrong, it's not going to bother us. And the reason why we wrote the article, we said if you're an atheist, you've only got one option. Life has to be a very easy step. But if you're a Christian, you've got multiple options. But we all agreed on this too. Based on Hebrews 9 and 10, Jesus Christ died one time, one place to redeem all, which means this is the only planet in which we got intelligent spiritual life. Now, physical life. I would argue angels are intelligent and spiritual, but they're different from us and they're not constrained by the physics of the universe. So on that basis, I think there's a lot of options. But I'll tell you, the scientific evidence is heavily favoring the fact that Earth is the only place that could conceivably have advanced life.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ross. I appreciate your discussion. Initially, you were talking about the scientific method and principle, and I believe part of that entails peer review and robust questioning, and I appreciate all the previous questions that have come up. My curiosity is still with the comment. You made some throwaway statements, and we see in the Genesis account a throwaway statement, and he created the stars, which is, as your study invokes, quite phenomenal and much more than what we can do in the sum of human abilities. But in your statement, you also mentioned in the discussion concerning the questions that, we see that there were the kings of the earth, the queens of the earth came to see Solomon, but that didn't include it. And you made a throwaway statement, the people from South American kingdoms or so on, or people from Australia, the indigenous peoples from Papua New Guinea or other such places, which you were using in a way to support the idea that perhaps the flood might have only occurred in a local, small geographic, not an entire globe sphere. That being the case, you also made a throwaway statement that we see the study of the genome articulating back to two people. So if the entire world population comes just from Noah and his family, succeeded down through Adam, this would lead you back to a conclusion of only two people. But having a population that could have been populated through Papua New Guinea or through complements from the Americas, then your genome studying from now would have to go possibly through either one of those kingdoms or Noah to reach Adam. This isn't fly in the ointment?
Yeah, okay, good question. Yeah, a lot of questions there. So because you're last, I'm going to let you, yeah. Okay, what he's talking about is, how can we make consistency out of, humanity coming from one man and one woman, and yet I was making these statements about the world of Solomon being limited in the text to Ethiopia, Southern Arabia, and the region around the Middle East. How can you build consistency there? And, I do believe the text is teaching that we're all descended from one man and one woman that lived in one place, the Garden of Eden. A little caveat on the scientific evidence. It's consistent with all of humanity being descended from one man and one woman, but it's also consistent with humanity being descended from a small population. So the jury is out there, but I think it's very interesting that the data is completely consistent with all of us being descended from one man and one woman. And the problem there is that the discipline of genetics is still fraught with big error bars. However, notice in the text, it tells us that humanity remained in one place until after the flood. Genesis 9 is followed by Genesis 10, the table of nations. And this is where we see the spreading of humanity out of one place into all the places of the world. So in that sense, we don't have people living in North and South America or Australia until the days after the flood. They're in one place. In fact, what you see is God speaking to Noah in rather strong language. This time you must multiply and fill the earth. It's a command he gave to Adam, but now he gives it much stronger language. So he's basically saying the error of the pre-flood peoples and the reason why evil multiplied out of control, people stayed in one place with one national government and oppression ran out of control, evil couldn't be checked. What we see in Genesis 11 is God scattering people over the face of the earth and setting up multiple nations that now must compete with one another for citizens. And this is a check against the spread of oppression and evil. But that was God's plan from the beginning, but humanity before the flood didn't obey that command. And so in terms of the flood, again, it's the world of the ungodly, the world at the time the event took place. And if I had time tonight, I would take you through the various biblical texts that I think more definitively establish humanity was in one place and the flood was a relatively local event. One text I will share with you, but it's repeated 5 times in 5 other creation texts. Psalm 104 takes you through the content of all 6 days. But when it addresses creation day 3, it speaks about God transforming the earth from a water world to where we now have oceans and continents. But that's Psalm 104, verses 7 and 8. Talks about God setting up these continents. But what you see in verse 9, once the continents are in place, never again will water cover the whole face of the earth. That's repeated in 2 other Psalms. It's repeated in Job. It's repeated in Proverbs 8. So those are 5 places you can go to say the flood of Noah could not be a worldwide event. And my whole point in taking you through examples like Paul's statement about the Roman Christians is to make the point, every time the Bible uses the word world, you need to examine the context to see what it's referring to. I mean, are we talking the whole planet? Are we talking the universe? Are we talking a portion of the planet? Each case, look at the context and see what's going on. And likewise, even in the flood account, you can go to Genesis 7:19, and it says water covered all the hills and mountains to a depth of 15 cubits. And but then you go into chapter 8. We got in chapter 8, verse 5, Noah on top of the ark. He looks out and he can see the distant hills and mountains. Later, he releases a dove, verse 9, and the dove is flying over the waters, and what does the text say? Water covered the whole face of the earth. The same phrase you see in Genesis 7:19. Here's the difference. Noah was 45 feet above the water, maybe higher. He could see the distant hills and mountains. The dove flying low over the water, all the dove could see was water from one end of the horizon to the other. In the church where I taught, I said, if you're 30 feet higher than your friend, how much farther across the horizon can you see? Well, it's actually many tens of miles. Just that little bit of height makes a big difference. That's why in sailing ships, say the crow's nest, you put a sailor up in the crow's nest, they can see distant land where people on the surface of the deck can only see water. Same principle is going on in Genesis 8. So even in Genesis, it's clear the flood is not a global event. Matter of fact, I debated some global flood proponents, and they insisted that Genesis 6, 7, and 8 only uses the word for earth that could mean the whole planet. And there's actually a Hebrew word, cherubah, that could never be used for the whole planet. And their argument was the flood text never uses the word cherubah. Well, the truth is they were wrong. It does use the word cherubah. So the very fact that the text itself uses a Hebrew word for earth that could never be used for the whole surface of the earth, right there in the text establishes we're not looking at a global event, but we are looking at a worldwide event. 22 times in Genesis 6, 7, and 8, it speaks about it and impacting all humanity and all the birds and mammals associated with humanity. So it was the world of humanity was wiped out, totally, except for those on board the ark.
Together as we thank Dr. Ross for his
again, we want to thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing your knowledge to glorify God through the science and through the knowledge. And let us conclude with a prayer. Let's stand up for a prayer, please. In the name of the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, one God, amen. Our Heavenly Father, we thank you for enriching us. We thank you because you have allowed us capabilities to use our knowledge, though limited, but to use it to glorify your holy name. We ask you to continue to guide us, as it is true. Our minds and abilities, they have power that could take us away from you, or that we could use it to bring us back to you. Let us use our abilities humbly, not pridefully. Let us use our abilities as you have created them to glorify your holy name. Thank you for creating in us curious minds that would lead us to you. We ask you to continue to guide us and guide our path, because your words is a light to our path. We ask you to bless us all and bless Dr. Ross and all those who are present here tonight. And hear us as we pray thankfully in your holy name. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, deliver us from evil. In Christ Jesus our Lord, thine is the kingdom, the power, the glory, forever. Amen. May we live in peace. The peace of the Lord be with you all.